Sagittarius. A call from spirit. The family karmic cycle ends with you. Some burdens don't begin with us, but somehow they find their way into our lives. Inherited not through choice but through blood, through silence, through patterns we didn't create yet were born into. And Sagittarius, if you've ever felt like the different one in your family, the one who sees too much, feels too deeply, or asks the questions no one wants to answer, this message is calling directly to your soul. You've always sensed it, haven't you? That there's something old moving through your family. A heaviness. A quiet tension that no one names. The way conflict is avoided. Feelings are buried. Truths are softened or denied. And somehow, even as a child, you knew this doesn't feel right. Spirit wants you to know you're not imagining it. And more than that, you were born to change it. This video is an invitation to step into your sacred role. Not as the one who carries the pain forward, but as the one who transforms it. The one who breaks the karmic cycle. The one who ends the silence, the shame, the blame, and brings healing into a lineage that has long forgotten what freedom feels like. If something in you stirs as you read these words, stay with me. This isn't about blame. It's about breakthrough. And if this message supports your journey, feel free to like, share, or subscribe. You are not alone in this sacred work. You are the cycle breaker, Sagittarius. Let's begin. Gate 1. Since childhood, you felt different from everyone else in your family. Sagittarius, your soul has always known it was here for something more. Even as a child, before you had the words for it, you could feel the difference. The undercurrent. The invisible tension that shaped the way people spoke, the way they didn't speak, the way emotions lived behind closed doors. You noticed things others seemed to ignore. You asked questions that made the adults shift uncomfortably in their chairs. You spoke truths that made people glance at each other and quickly change the subject. Maybe you were told you were too intense, too curious, or too sensitive. But what they didn't understand was that you weren't being difficult, you were awakening. And they didn't know how to handle that. From an early age, you may have sensed that something in your family didn't quite feel right. That the stories you were told didn't match the energy in the room. That there were secrets no one would name, wounds no one would talk about, emotions no one knew how to hold. And so, like many old souls born into tired systems, you learned to observe, to feel, to sense your way through the disconnect. You didn't fit the mold, and you weren't meant to. You may have wondered, why am I so different? Why do I feel like the outsider even in my own home? But the truth is, you weren't the outsider. You were the one who saw through the illusion. The one whose light revealed the shadows others had spent generations avoiding. I once worked with a Sagittarius man named Joel, who grew up in a family where no one talked about emotions. Everything was fine. Anger was buried. Sadness was ignored. And truth? Truth was treated like a threat. Joel told me that by the age of 8, he already felt too big for the space he was given. His ideas were met with silence, his tears with shame, and his joy. It was often dimmed by those who didn't know how to receive it. But something in him refused to shrink. He didn't know it then, but he was already carrying the seeds of transformation, not just for himself, but for the generations that came before and the ones yet to come. Like you, Sagittarius, he wasn't born into his family by accident. He was placed there with purpose, to disrupt, to awaken, and to heal. This is why you felt different. This is why you couldn't follow the script. Because your soul was never here to repeat the past. It was here to end what needed ending, and begin what had never been allowed to begin. You may have watched others in your family conform, stay silent, pretend. You may have felt alone in your desire to speak honestly, to explore deeper, to love more openly. But that loneliness wasn't a punishment. It was a sacred initiation. A call from spirit saying you are not like them. And that is not a flaw. It is your task. Being the one who sees is not always easy. Often it means carrying pain that isn't yours, feeling what others refuse to feel, and standing in rooms where your truth makes people uncomfortable. Not because you're wrong, but because they've forgotten how to be honest. But this is also where your power lives. Because when you were young, you sensed the pattern. You felt the weight of stories left unspoken. And even if you didn't understand it then, your soul knew. This ends with me. You don't have to be like them to love them. You don't have to follow their path to honor your own. You are allowed to love your family and break their rules. You are allowed to respect their pain and reject the way they passed it on. You are allowed to say, I choose truth, even if it separates me. I choose light, even if it blinds those who've been living in the dark. And no matter how hard they try to silence that fire in you, they can't. Because it's not just your fire, it's ancestral, spiritual, cosmic. It was lit lifetimes ago by someone in your bloodline who didn't get the chance to speak, to heal, to be free. And now that chance lives in you. This first gate is not about blame. It's about recognition, about looking clearly at what you came into, not with judgment but with sacred honesty. You felt different because you are different. And that difference is not your burden, it is your gift. The very thing that will set you and your lineage free. As we step into the second gate, we'll explore what you've likely always sensed. The deeper karmic patterns in your family, the silence, the secrecy, the shame, and why your soul said yes to being the one who breaks them. Gate 2. A generational pattern: silence, secrecy, and the cycle of blame. Sagittarius, once you begin to see clearly, there's no going back. And what you've begun to see, maybe slowly, maybe all at once, is that the pain in your family didn't begin with you. It was passed down, handed quietly from one generation to the next. Not always through words, but through patterns, through behaviors, through the things no one ever talked about. You've likely noticed it for years, even before you could fully name it. A tendency to keep secrets, to bury discomfort, to avoid vulnerability. Emotions in your family may have been treated like something dangerous, something to suppress rather than express. When conflict arose, it was either ignored or masked with politeness. When someone hurt another, it was brushed off with "they didn't mean it," or "that's just how they are." But you felt it. You saw how that silence shaped people, how it hardened some, how it hollowed others, how blame was passed around like a family heirloom, never truly examined, just quietly inherited. Maybe your father blamed his father. Your mother blamed her mother. And each one, in their own way, carried wounds they didn't know how to heal, so they handed them down instead. Sagittarius, this is the karmic cycle. Not punishment, not curse, just unconscious repetition until someone like you chooses to stop it. And here's what makes it even more difficult. When you begin to name the pattern, when you start to speak what has long been buried, you become the disruption. Not everyone will welcome that. Some may say you're stirring up trouble. Others may accuse you of being dramatic, disloyal, or ungrateful. But that's only because silence was their safety. Denial was their survival. And you, by refusing to pretend, are asking them to wake up in ways they never learned how to. You may have already experienced this. The tension when you bring up things that others would rather not talk about. The discomfort when you name the harm that's been normalized. The coldness that follows your truth-telling. Not because you're wrong, but because you're refusing to play the role they assigned you. And yet, even through the resistance, something in you knows. This isn't who I'm meant to become. You don't want to repeat what hurt you. You don't want to keep secrets to feel safe. You don't want to pass blame down the line and call it legacy. You want freedom, honesty, healing. But the decision to break the cycle doesn't just happen once. It happens again and again. Every time you choose to respond with awareness instead of reactivity. Every time you choose self-reflection over shame. Every time you say, "It stops with me," it is a quiet revolution. And it is exhausting, because it means being the one who feels more, who notices more, who cries when no one else seems to, who sets boundaries where there were none, who seeks truth even when it hurts, who holds space for healing while still protecting your own peace. But know this, Sagittarius, your courage is creating a ripple through your lineage. Even if they don't understand, even if they never thank you, even if they continue pretending, something shifts every time you refuse to carry what isn't yours. I once worked with a Sagittarius named Lynn who, after years of being the good daughter, finally decided to confront the way emotional manipulation was normalized in her family. She spoke gently but truthfully with her mother, who responded with anger. Her siblings called her selfish. For weeks, she felt like she'd broken something sacred. But in the quiet that followed, her younger niece began reaching out to her, asking questions about boundaries, about healing, about truth. "That's when I knew," Lynn said. "This isn't just about me. It's about who comes after me." And it is, Sagittarius, this karmic work you're doing. It's not just for your own liberation. It's for your children, your younger siblings, the generations who will no longer inherit the silence you were born into. You are clearing the path they'll walk. And one day they'll look back at the moment when everything began to change, and they'll find you. Let this gate be your reminder. The pattern is real. The pain is inherited. But you are the change. You are not here to carry the shame. You are here to transmute it. You are not here to maintain the silence. You are here to break it. Gently, truthfully, lovingly. And as we step into the next gate, we'll explore how a recent event, perhaps painful, perhaps unexpected, has stirred the truth even more. How Spirit has placed something undeniable in your path to help you fully see your role as a healer, as a transformer, as the one who ends what must end and births what has never had space to begin. Gate 3. A recent event cracked open the past and revealed your role as the healer. Sometimes the universe doesn't whisper, it shouts. And for you, Sagittarius, that moment may have already happened. A sudden event. A conversation that ended with more silence than understanding. A family conflict that felt strangely familiar, as if it had been building for years beneath the surface. Or maybe it wasn't dramatic at all. Maybe it was something subtle. A look, a question, a piece of information casually revealed that made the entire story shift in your heart. But whatever it was, it changed something. You felt it. Deeply. And in that moment, the veil was lifted. Suddenly, things you once brushed off began to make sense. The coldness from certain relatives. The guilt woven into even the smallest choices. The feeling that you were always too much, or not enough, depending on who you were around. The constant pressure to behave, to stay quiet, to not cause waves. It wasn't just personal. It was generational. And the truth you saw in that moment wasn't just about them. It was about you. Your place. Your purpose. Your role not as the problem but as the pattern breaker. For many Sagittarius souls, this awakening happens after a rupture. Something that seems unfair, out of proportion, a betrayal, a revelation, or even just a truth finally spoken out loud. And while it may feel like the world is falling apart, it's actually falling into place. Because Spirit has been guiding you here for a long time, preparing you. And now that the truth is revealed, you can no longer go back to pretending. You can no longer carry on like you don't know what you now know. You see your family clearly now, not just their flaws but their fragility, their inherited wounds, their survival mechanisms. And it breaks your heart not because they failed you but because they never had what you now have, awareness. You have the language. You have the tools. You have the desire to heal what they never could. But you also know it cannot be forced. You can't make someone grow who's committed to staying asleep. You can't fix what someone is still denying. And your role isn't to carry everyone. It's to choose differently. This recent event, the one that cracked you open, is your initiation. It's the call to step more fully into your power. Not to become the savior of your family, but to become the embodied truth teller. The one who honors pain without perpetuating it. The one who says, this ends here. Not with resentment but with reverence. You may feel alone right now. You may feel like no one truly understands the weight of what you're carrying. But I want you to hear this. You were never meant to walk this path the way they did. You were not born to keep repeating. You were born to interrupt, to disrupt, to transform. And no, it isn't fair. No, you didn't ask for this role. But your soul said yes to it. Long before you arrived in this body, in this lifetime, in this lineage, you agreed to be the one who would choose a different way. I once worked with a Sagittarius woman named Amara, who found out in her 30s that an entire part of her family history had been hidden from her. Intentionally. It wasn't just the secret that hurt. It was the fact that so many people she loved had quietly agreed to keep it from her. When she confronted them, most denied it. Others said, "We were just trying to protect you." But Amara knew better. She said, what they were really protecting was their story, not mine. And in that moment, she stopped playing along. She stopped performing politeness to make others comfortable. She began living more truthfully, and slowly, though painfully, began weaving a new relationship with her past. One based on clarity, not illusion. That is what you're being asked to do now, Sagittarius. This moment, the rupture, the revelation, the shift, it is not your undoing. It is your becoming. It's the moment where you stop waiting for others to take responsibility and begin choosing your response. Where you stop hoping they'll change and instead change how you show up. where you stop hiding your light out of guilt, and instead, allow it to shine even brighter. Not in defiance, but in devotion to what's real. You are being called into soul leadership. Not the kind that requires perfection, but the kind that chooses courage even when the room is quiet. The kind that loves without enabling. The kind that forgives without forgetting. The kind that tells the truth not to punish but to liberate. Let this be your confirmation. What you felt was real. What you saw was true. And what comes next is up to you. As we step into the final gate, we'll explore what it means to fully walk out of ancestral shadow into the light of a new story. One written not in reaction to the past, but in alignment with your soul's deepest longing. Freedom, love, and truth. Gate 4. Walking out of ancestral shadow and writing a new chapter of freedom and love. Sagittarius, now that you've seen the truth, now that the curtain has been pulled back on what's been carried, silently, painfully, for generations, there is no returning to who you were before. And the beautiful, terrifying thing is, you're not meant to. You are not here to edit the old script. You are here to write a new one. This is the final gate, and it is both an ending and a beginning. The ending of your silent agreement to carry what wasn't yours. The ending of guilt for being the one who questions. The ending of generational shame disguised as loyalty. And the beginning of something entirely new. Because when you say, "It stops with me," what you're really saying is, "I will no longer betray myself in the name of belonging. I will no longer repeat cycles just because they're familiar. I will no longer confuse quiet suffering with love." Instead, you are choosing to step out of the ancestral shadow into a kind of light your lineage has never known, but deeply longs for. That light is your honesty. That light is your healing. That light is your freedom. But let's not romanticize it. This path is not simple. Healing is not linear. Some days you will want to fall back into old patterns. Some days you'll feel the ache of distance from those who don't understand the path you've chosen. Some days you'll wonder, is it even worth it? But then something shifts. You wake up and realize you didn't overreact, you grew. You stopped playing small so others could stay comfortable. You stopped confusing silence for peace. You began honoring your voice, your truth, your body, your boundaries. And in that honoring, something ancestral within you begins to release. This is liberation, Sagittarius. Not only for you but for those who will walk after you. The children who will not inherit the weight you carried. The families you'll help build based on truth, not performance. The relationships you'll attract that don't demand you shrink to fit someone else's fear. And make no mistake, your ancestors are watching. The ones who were silenced. The ones who broke but didn't heal. The ones who longed for freedom and never got the chance to claim it. They walk with you now not as burdens but as witnesses. You are doing what they couldn't. You are healing the bloodline by honoring the soul. I once guided a Sagittarius man named Nico who, after years of feeling unseen by his emotionally avoidant father, decided to stop chasing approval and start choosing truth. He wrote a letter he never sent, pouring out every unspoken word, every unmet need, every moment of pain. Then he read it aloud in ritual, not to confront but to release. And when he finished, he said quietly, "I forgive you, but I am not you. And I don't have to become you to love myself." That was the day Nico stepped out of the shadow. And now, Sagittarius, it's your turn. You don't need a grand gesture. You don't need a final conversation. You only need to make a decision. That from this moment on, your life will not be shaped by fear, guilt, or silence. It will be shaped by presence, by clarity, by love that doesn't demand your disappearance. You are the end of the old pattern, and the beginning of a legacy built on truth. This legacy won't look like perfection. It will look like emotional honesty, like nervous conversations that open the heart, like boundaries set without apology, like moments where you hold your own hand and say, "This version of me is worth protecting." You are the one who builds a home where feelings are not threats, but invitations, where tenderness is not weakness but wisdom, where love doesn't come with conditions, but with presence, patience, and depth. Let this be your sacred promise to yourself. You will no longer carry what was never yours. You will no longer twist yourself to fit into stories that keep you small. You will no longer wait for permission to shine. Instead, you will write the chapter that no one else dared to begin. And as we step into the final words of this journey together, we'll gather these threads into a closing that honors what you've broken, and what you're building in its place. Conclusion: the cycle ends with you because your soul remembered what they forgot. Sagittarius, if your heart is trembling right now, if your chest feels cracked open in both pain and relief, know that this is not the breaking. This is the birthing. You have just walked through generations of silence. You have touched the pulse of pain that didn't begin with you, but that lived in your body as if it had. And instead of passing it on, you stood still. You listened. You grieved. You chose differently. This is sacred work. You didn't have to become the healer. You weren't obligated to be the one who untangles the knots, names the patterns, opens the old wounds so they can finally breathe. But still you did. And that choice, that radical act of soul bravery, is everything. You have felt the loneliness of truth, the sting of rejection from those who would rather you stay silent. You've known what it's like to cry alone after speaking what no one else dared say. But now I want you to know this. You are not alone. Every step you've taken in this healing, every moment you refused to carry shame, every boundary you drew from love, every tear you let fall in private, has echoed across your lineage. Your ancestors may not have had the words, but they feel what you're doing. And the ones who suffered in silence, they are bowing to you now. You are not just breaking a cycle. You are fulfilling a prayer someone whispered long before you were born. And even more, you are becoming the kind of ancestor this earth needs. One who will be remembered not for keeping the peace, but for creating it, from the inside out. If this message has held you, witnessed you, walked beside you, please like, share, or subscribe. Not for algorithmic success, but for the community we are building. A sanctuary where truth is not punished, where healing is not rushed, and where your story matters. I'm Sophia, and this is Zodiac Wisdom. Until we meet again, may your path be blessed with clarity, your heart with courage, and your legacy with light.